Please enjoy to the story Something Sweet. 21 vertical line phones. It was 1:15 when Jay's phone rang. He'd left the bonfire by midnight when Courtney was beyond wasted. After dropping her home, he'd driven around for a while. He wondered what he'd think of it. He allowed himself to sit in his room in complete, utter silence. The darkness would edge towards him and gnaw at him and swallow him whole. He was scared. Jay listened, eternally smiling and living on the edge, was scared of the dark, of his thoughts, of himself. But he had only so much time before everything that terrified him caught up to him. The darkness was everywhere and it snagged a piece of him every time he blinked. The memories were constantly crashing and thrashing and they painted his vision red. Every time he glanced at his white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel or the strung muscles in his arms, Jay knew he wasn't himself anymore. He was angry, obsessive. He'd carried Courtney to her bedroom when they arrived at her house. Jay knew her parents were heavy sleepers because Courtney wasn't quiet in bed at all. If they could sleep through her screams, they could sleep through Jay padding through their house. They could even sleep through Courtney talking to him the entire time. "Alex," she groaned, pressing her face into his stomach. Jay stopped and closed his eyes, gathering himself. "Why do you always hang out with my sister? You always liked me better. You said so yourself. Lola's too uptight for you, isn't she?" Jay loosened a deep breath. Courtney continued. "You wanted fun, and she wanted serious. That's what you didn't like about her, right? That's why you liked about me, right?" Jay slammed his foot down on the brakes, lurching forward. He was panting. He was infuriated, and he couldn't get enough oxygen in his system. His lungs were constricting but nothing was going into them. There was holes in his heart, thousands of them. One for every single time Alex had hurt him, Courtney had hurt him, Lola had tried to hurt him. His emotions were a wildfire and there was no putting them out. It was only a matter of minutes before he was nothing but ashes. He wondered if he should have gotten drunk at the bonfire. Then, he wouldn't care about Courtney calling out for Alex, or Alex calling out for Lola, or Lola calling out for him. In fact, he didn't want to care about any of them. Jay shouldn't have tried so hard to win Courtney back. He shouldn't have lied with Lola. He shouldn't have become friends with Alex. Jay jumped when his phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" He recognized the voice on the other end of the line immediately. Jay. His name came out as a choked sob. "Lola. What's wrong? Can you come pick me up?" She was still very much drunk. Jay was already on his way back to the beach. "Are you okay? Where's Alex?" "I don't know," she sobbed. "Where are you?" "I don't know." Jay kept her on the phone as long as he could. He was lucky he hadn't crashed into anything, or gotten caught for driving so fast. His car couldn't handle the way he shifted gears or the way he didn't let up on the acceleration. It sputtered and shook and Jay knew he was going to go to hell trying to fix his car the next day, but he didn't care. Lola's sobs were fast fading. Lola had apparently decided to start walking home because Jay found her a half-mile away from the beach. Her hair was tangled and dirty, and she was barefoot. Jay didn't think she'd put her bikini top back on with the way she blanket was tightly clutched around her neck. Lola shrank away when Jay's headlights shone down on her. Jay bit his lip when he saw her with none of her belongings, and no Alex at her side. He promised himself he wouldn't get upset, but his resolve was fragile. He didn't bother to grab his keys, or shut the car door. When Jay's feet hit the asphalt, he took off running. He caught Lola just as she fell into his arms. She was almost unconscious, but still crying. She curled into him as he picked her up. "Home," she whispered. "Home, home, home." Jay helped her into the back seat and buckled her in. "I'll take you home, Lola. You're safe now." He could almost hear the sad smile. "Home, home," he echoed. This was why Jay got angry. Alex didn't know what was good for Lola. Lola didn't know what was good for herself. Courtney didn't give a flying fuck about anything. Jay cared too much for his own good. Over the rev of the engine and the madness in his head, Jay almost lost the "I love you" echoing from the back seat. 22 Vertical line asparagus. The Capstan household was infested with two very hungover, very cranky girls. It was a Monday morning and both parents had to go to work, having just put the sisters back to sleep. Neither was amused by the girls' antics, which was why they were more than happy to accept Jay's help. When he showed up at their doorstep first thing in the morning, he offered to cook the girls' food and clean up their vomit and sing them to sleep. Lola's mom looked like she was about to cry tears of joy, and Jay took a step back. He'd had enough emotions for 1 week. Jay was left with a paycheck, cleaning supplies, and various prayers when Lola's parents walked out the door. They couldn't have left any faster. It was only a matter of time before the girls woke up and started wailing. Courtney, especially. If she wasn't trying to go into fashion design, she could have been the new Kim Kardashian, narcissistic, moody, and always screaming about the next most unimportant thing in her life. Jay made a face. What did he see in Lola's sister? He'd been sitting on the couch for 10 minutes, and he hadn't come up with a single thing. Jay was still thinking when he heard the first moan. He'd seen enough horror movies to know not to search source of the sound. Jay should have walked his eager ass out of the house when he heard the moan get louder. It was starting to sound more like a gurgle than anything. Unfortunately for Jay, he was a curious bastard. He would probably be the first to die in a movie. Face mask on, and a Swiffer sweeper in hand, he made his way upstairs. For all he knew, both Courtney and Lola were still asleep and their house was haunted. Perhaps the ghost of one of Courtney's ex-boyfriends haunted the grounds. Jay wouldn't have been surprised. Courtney could probably whine someone to death, literally speaking. When Jay pushed Courtney's bedroom door open, he found her lying on the ground in a puddle of her own puke. He nearly slipped on it trying to get to her. The smell brought tears to his eyes, and when he saw that she was, in fact, gurgling her own vomit, he couldn't take it anymore. He Febrezed the entire room, threw away his socks, disinfected the girl by pouring laundry detergent on her, and washed himself 3 times with the family soap in the ensuite. He was grabbing his keys and preparing to go out and buy a hazmat suit when he heard the second moan. In all honesty, Jay was suddenly preferring a haunted house over a house with 2 sick girls. A haunted house was less maintenance. He'd be dead already, and no paperwork would be required. In a house with 2 girls, he couldn't kill either of them because that was homicide, and jail was horrible. He couldn't kill himself because that was suicide and he had to go to Minnesota for college. He'd already paid tuition. He couldn't even duct tape their mouths shut because he feared they would drown themselves trying to choke up last night's dinner. Jay wasn't winning in any scenario he came up with. He was ready with the Febreze and food when he pushed Lola's door open. To his surprise, she wasn't as bad as her sister. She was a sickly green and sweat was beaded on her forehead, but otherwise, she could have passed off for a human. Courtney, on the other hand, looked like Jay had dragged her out of a dumpster. While trying to clean her up, Jay had even witnessed her dexterously take her bra off without taking off her shirt. For a hungover girl who couldn't sit straight, it was awfully impressive. Lola tried to smile and sit up when she saw him, but a sharp pain struck at the back of her head. She fell back down and pulled the covers over her head. "What are you doing?" Jay laughed. "I'm a widow of sickness. Get away from me." "You know that's not happening," he told her as he sat at her bedside. The mattress sank under his weight, and upon feeling it, Lola slowly unraveled herself. Her eyes were sunken and red and her hair was still a bird's nest, yet Jay was still thinking about how beautiful she was. "What happened last night? Do you want the euphemistic version or the "you're a fucking idiot" version?" "The former." It was story time all over again. "You came to the bonfire with Alex. You guys set up a tent and probably shagged. I found you in there half naked, just saying. Then I left with Courtney when she got wasted and drove around in the middle of the night like a creeper. You called me with God knows whose phone, and you were sobbing. You decided to walk home barefoot and without a top. All your things still with the missing Alex. Don't worry, though. I didn't see your boobs. But, you were wasted. I drove you home, put you in bed, tried to dress you, and then I showed up this morning to take care of you and Courtney. Any questions?" "I walked out in public without a shirt or bra on. You had a blanket covering you, if that makes you feel any better." Lola tried to hide, but Jay wouldn't let her. Her embarrassment was too good. "I got drunk last night. I've never gotten drunk before. Alex really isn't the best influence, if you haven't noticed." Lola's eyes widened. "You said he was missing. Where'd he go?" "Not sure. I didn't bother to look for him. You were crying so I took you straight home. When we see him tomorrow, we can kick his ass together." "Did anything else embarrassing happen?" Jay pondered. He decided he wanted closure. "You asked me to kiss you after a couple of drinks, and then told me you loved me when you were drunk." "I did." He nodded. She shook her head. "I wish I could tell you if I meant it romantically or not, Jay. I really do. You have your wits together now, don't you? Can't you tell me what you meant?" He underestimated her. She was a master at avoiding the topic. "Jay, I'm hungover. I can't even remember how to pee, much less remember how I meant something when I said it. Give me some of that damn food and let me sleep." It was okay though. Jay had just the thing to get a little payback. "Here," he said. "Have some asparagus." Lola's face fell. "That's disgusting. No one likes asparagus. Give me some Fruit Loops." Jay smiled. "No can do, love. I read somewhere that asparagus can help with hangovers. You're going to finish this bowl of asparagus, and you're going to love it." She glared at him, poking him in the stomach. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm now a tortilla of sickness. I'm trying to pass my disease on to you. Hangovers aren't contagious, dumb bats." She stabbed him in the stomach with her finger again. "That's what you think." 23 Vertical line water. Every conversation with Jay cracked her a little. Lola was still recovering from the aftermath of the bonfire 2 days later, and she decided to treat herself. With Courtney at summer school and her parents at work, she took advantage of the ensuite. She opened the curtains, allowing the natural light to filter in. When Lola peered over the windowsill, she caught sight of the dense forest behind her house. The canopy of leaves shadowed over their roof and tickled the window pane, the branches knocking against the wall as the breeze whistled. Hair pulled up, she stepped out of her pajamas. The suds in the bathtub pop, pop, popped around her as she effortlessly eased in, sinking beneath the surface. Water lapped against the contours of her body, molding around her. The lukewarm heat was a cocoon that lulled her to a blissful tranquility, temporary sleep. Lola stretched in the tub and flexed, smiling as her mind wandered. She imagined herself at the beach, leaning back in the sand. She bathed under the sun, but she was still cool. The sand fell over her fingertips and scrubbed against the panes of skin. The rushing water tentatively licked her feet. When she didn't pull away, it kissed the inside of her thighs. When she curled, it brushed her shoulders with a swift sweep. When she arched, it cupped the back of her head and supported her lower back. When she drifted out to sea, seaweed and seashells made a bed for her. Coral and anemones flowered from her skin. She imagined herself on the boardwalk, dancing along the wooden planks. She hopped from foot to foot, careful not to step on the cracks. The lantern swayed above her, in sync with her dance as she twisted and turned and dipped and tumbled. Clumsy, but ensnaring she was. The water drummed her a rhythm and the wind hummed the melody for her to sing along to. Strangers clasped her hands in theirs and smiled down at her as she waltzed. Above her, the stars crashed and burst, showering her in light. She was enchanting. Liquid starlight glazed her skin until she was slick with brilliance. Stardust bled into her until it was threaded into her veins and embroidered into her muscles. It shimmered in her hair, with the moonlight casting its ethereal glow down on her. Lola was transcendent. Her head was still tilted back against the cold marble of the tub, eyes still rested shut, when the bathroom door squeaked open. Her body trembled when she felt two hands frame the sides of her face and a pair of lips scheme over her nose surreptitiously. The fingers that tangled in her hair were anything but gentle. They snapped her head back, baring her neck. Teeth snagged the skin on the side of her neck, tugging and nibbling. Lola pressed against the base of the tub to keep from losing control over her body. She wrapped her arms around herself. "Care to join me?" she breathed. "Is that a request?" The voice was a slow burn, frayed at the tip but crisp at the end. It ignited a fire that roiled through her body, sending her temperature skyrocketing. Her breaths came out in ragged puffs. "It's a command." A smile tugged at the corners of her lips when she heard the flap of a belt buckle. She knew the sound of jeans hitting the polished tile floor. Lola cried out when a body pressed squarely against hers. Her eyes shot open, and immediately she found herself lost in his. The insides of his irises started off hazel before bleeding green, flecked with specks of gold wherever. His pupils were dilated but his eyelids were heavy, with lust and passion and mischief. He pushed off of her, settling into the other end of the tub, arms braced on each side. The smirk dared her to come to him. The bubbles in the water dotted his brown blonde hair, accenting his unruly curls and wrapping around the rubber band holding them back. "Now what? I didn't tell you to stop." "Then tell me what you want." "Everything, Jay." He was already pulling her towards him. Their gasps were one when their hips connected. He was so hard against her when he sat up, cushioning the back of her neck with his hand as his lips dragged down from her collarbone to the center of her chest, to the spot right between her breasts. She bit down on her tongue, hard, to keep her moans at bay. The water was growing colder around them, hardening them against each other. When he trailed a fingertip over the peak of her breast, her resolve dissolved around her. When his fingertip dipped past her navel, her head fell back. He demanded penance for her rapture, an intoxicating tease. She clung to him tightly as fingertips tickled her, as they raced against her tender skin. The rapid rise, fall of her chest gave him no room to breathe. She was cracking, fracturing, shattering all around him as he pulled back. Yet he still wasn't done. She was a canvas for his madness, and when he dipped his head under the water, he made sure to paint every edge of her body until she was sleek with his desire tied down to her. More. He was on top of her. He was looking directly into her eyes as he rested against her, experimenting, waiting. Her hands resting on the small of his back, she helped him in. His lips puckered as she released a sigh of relief, and the front door slammed shut. Lola jolted awake and glanced around. She was still in her house, still in the ensuite, still in the bathtub. Only one thing was missing. Jay. 24 vertical line storms. Movie night at the Capstans was always a good night. Lola dragged Jay to her basement by the threads of his cotton shirt. But Jay didn't trust her. For all he knew, she was taking him down to her dungeons where she killed everyone who made her eat asparagus. After realizing that she really wasn't going to give Jay her hangover, Lola decided that the best way to get back at him was to kill him. In fact, instead of sleeping, she took out a notebook and started planning out ways to carry out inconspicuous murders. She even tuned in for the season finale of How to Get Away with Murder just to get ideas. She only got two things out of that: spoilers and a new dream boyfriend. Jay paused on the last step, peering around the wall to check out his surroundings. It looked innocuous enough. There was the screen and projector, and there was the treadmill and foosball table and Monopoly board. Jay started envisioning all the ways to die. Lola could electrocute him to death, or run him to the ground, or hit him in face with the ball, or, the worst of all, make him bankrupt. Jay jumped. He wrenched away from Lola, who gave him a weird look. She'd been doing that all night. She'd been acting weird around him ever since the bonfire, and Jay sometimes wondered if it was because she harbored some uncharted feelings too. "What is wrong with you? All I want to do is watch scream." He knew it. He was going to die. She had already taken him to the basement, where no one would hear his cries for help. She was making him watch a horror movie, which was going to give her even more ideas on how to kill him. Jay took a step back. "I need to go to the bathroom. I'll be back in a couple of minutes." "Make it quick," she told him. "Demons wait for no one." "Psycho," he muttered under his breath as he trudged back upstairs. Jay was in the bathroom and shutting the door when he heard a creak. Strange. Lola had told him no one was home at the hour, so they were free to do whatever they wanted. And Jay, being the ruffian he was, intended on taking full advantage of that. His flirtatiousness was supposed to hit its peak tonight, but instead, someone decided to crash the party and lurk around the house. Fucking ghosts. Jay immediately reached for the cleaning supplies under the sink, fingers wrapping around a bottle of bug spray. It was no pepper spray, but who knew? Maybe bug spray was good at keeping ghosts away too. Jay was officially a ghostbuster. As he reached the top of stairs, The moans sounded like screams. They were deafening, and they came from Courtney's room. Was she masturbating? Jay knew she was loud in bed with someone else, but being that loud when she was alone was just ridiculous. How could someone have sex with a girl who sounded like an alarm clock at 6 in the morning? Bug spray tight in his palm and his finger on the nozzle, Jay kicked her bedroom door open. The click of the lock was drowned out by a groan of pleasure. Jay clenched his fist as he made out Courtney's raven hair spread over her pillow. The body on top of her thrusted roughly and the covers slipped down his back, exposing a sliver of familiar tanned skin. It was wet with sweat. "Again?" he asked, but they didn't hear him. "Fucking again?" Alex rolled off of Courtney immediately, diving under the covers. Courtney covered her mouth with both hands, eyes wide and panicked. She opened her mouth, tried to say something to Jay, but no words came to mind. She was still recovering from her high, and she wasn't able to register Jay standing in front of her, watching her cheat on him for the second time. "How long have you been standing there?" she forced out. His legs were weak. The bug spray settled at his feet as he started to crumble. His knees hit the ground first, the bones rattling upon impact. His hands strung into his hair and tugged. They didn't know what else to do. He closed his eyes as his body began to shake. His lips were slick with spit and his eyes were wet with tears, and Jay keeled forward. He pressed his forehead into his lap as a whimper tore through his throat. The guttural noise followed, and then he was crying. The tears were foreign on his cheeks. The salt was unwelcome on his lips. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cried. It was a silent kind, too. The one where he was so drained, so tired, that he couldn't even bring himself to choke on his own heart. This was when the warmest hearts turned cold, frozen in time. This was when the fiercest hearts withered and desiccated. "Jay, please get up." His hand shot out. He could make out from his peripheral vision that she was wearing a robe, and she was climbing out of bed. He'd aired her away. "Don't you dare think of coming closer. Stay the fuck away from me. I'm begging you to just hear. You don't get to beg me for anything," he screamed. "How many times did I get down on my knees and beg you, Courtney? I begged you for your love, for your loyalty, for your trust, and you didn't give me a single fucking thing. I loved you despite what you do, in spite of you who you are, and still it isn't enough for you." Courtney looked like she wanted to say something, but the words died on her tongue when Lola walked in. She was still smiling, and she was clutching her leather jacket to her chest when she peeked inside. First her eyebrows drew in when she took in a partially naked Courtney. Her eyes narrowed when Alex sat up in bed. He was starting to look just as terrified as Lola's sister. Lola was sluggish when she stepped closer to Jay. He was broken and bleeding all over the carpet floor. His hands still pulled at his hair and his body was still racked with sobs. She didn't know how to take any of it. He flinched when she touched his back. He tried to move away from her, like she was going to stab him. Just as if she was going to stab him through the heart like Courtney had done one too many times. He stuck to himself, tucked into a tiny ball, when Lola sat beside him. She couldn't control the violent tremors in her hands. "Look at me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Just look at me." Jay didn't even have the strength to lift his head. "How long has this been going?" she asked, her voice laced with venom. Her eyes were daggers and she hoped she could hurt Courtney and Alex the way they'd hurt her and Alex. for a while," Alex said. His head was bowed, and his gaze was downcast. "Neither of you cared to say anything. Both of you just decided you'd let us chase you around. Is this some kind of prank you guys were trying to pull on us? The revenge plan? Did we do something to you?" Lola didn't swear. She wasn't supposed to swear. That wasn't who Lola Capston was. Courtney was crying too. "Stop accusing us like we did something wrong. Is loving each other so wrong? That's like asking me if cheating on someone is wrong. You say that like neither of you have ever done anything wrong," Alex chimed in. "Jay isn't innocent in all this." "Threesome," was the first thing that popped into Lola's head. Next to her, Jay visibly stilled. He was slow to rise, but when he's standing straight, he seemed taller, bigger. His shoulders were broader, his muscles were larger. Tear trails were dry on his cheeks, and his lips were chapped, twisted into a savage sneer. He was a monster with an appetite. He had fangs and claws and horns. He looked like he would lash out at anything that moved. "Shut up." Alex stood. He'd somehow found his pants beneath the covers and he was pulling them on. Lola. He knew about this all along. He walked in on me and Courtney once before. That's why he broke up with her. That's why I broke up with you. And this entire summer, when you ran after me, Jay never told you about what we did. Isn't him keeping that a secret just as bad? You wasted your entire summer on a guy who couldn't love you that way you wanted, and Jay never said anything. Fuck you. Jay spit. Courtney got between them as Jay raised his fists. His biceps were bulging, all his lean muscle corded together as he edged towards Alex. Alex stepped back, hands braced over his face. In a normal situation, Jay and Alex would have been equals, but Alex was nothing when compared to an angry Jay. He knew it, and he knew what was best for him was to avoid the fight for as long as possible. He was lucky that Courtney was between them because Jay looked like nothing was going to get in his way. Consider their friend ties severed. The three were so involved in their own problems that none had noticed when Lola crawled out of the room. They only realized when the stairs were giving out underneath her angry footsteps. Jay was the first to follow, and then Courtney. Alex knew better than the both of them. She didn't want confrontation, she just wanted them all gone. Nonetheless, he went downstairs. "Lola, please," Courtney called out, but her sister was already zipping her jacket. For an August night, it terribly chilly and Lola was the least prepared. She didn't have her car keys, they were in Jay's pockets, and she didn't have an umbrella to battle the rain. Lola had no destination in mind. She just wanted to get away from all of them. Her again ex-boyfriend couldn't be trusted. Her alleged friend couldn't be trusted. Her sister didn't even care enough for her. "Don't talk to me," she snapped. When Jay's fingers closed around her wrist just as hers closed around the doorknob, she wrenched away from him. "Don't touch me." "Stay, Lola," Courtney tried again. "We can all sit down somewhere and talk about this calmly. I just ask that you stay. Number. Tell me what I need to do to keep you at home. I'll do anything." "Anything." Courtney nodded. She was shivering beneath her robe and the tears hadn't stopped. She clung to Alex for support, and when their fingers entwined, Lola noticed. She was on overdrive. She was aware of the way Jay still shook, and the way Alex was rubbing his sweaty palms against his pants. He'd only ever seen Courtney cry, and that's what he was most comfortable with. He didn't know how to handle Lola when she was mad. She was a time bomb and the seconds were tick ticking away. He didn't know how long they had before she imploded on them, but once she went off, only one group would come out okay. Then get out. Lola yanked the door open. Get the hell out of my house. Your house? Alex asked, incredulously. She your sister, Lola? Not anymore, she isn't. She stopped being my sister the moment I found out she slept with my boyfriend, Lola snapped. I loved her like no one else would. I believed her when she said she would change for the better. I stood by her and carried her through school on my back. I treated her like any sister should treat one of their own, and this is what I get in return for that. She owes me this much. Courtney's head hung low because deep down, Lola was right. She didn't say anything when Lola reached into Jay's pant pocket and fished out her car keys. She didn't wince then they pressed down into the skin of her palm. She didn't protest when Alex gently encouraged her to walk outside with him. I'm sorry, Lola, she said. That means nothing to me anymore. Lola turned to Jay. Get out. Don't break my heart. That's no reason. I had my heart broken twice in one day, and it was all because my friend couldn't tell me the truth. Why? I don't know. Who were you trying to protect by keeping that secret, Jay? Them, me, or yourself? I don't know. So we've reached an impasse then. You don't know why you did what you did and I don't know why you're still in my house. Something about the Capstan sisters was constantly bringing Jay down to his knees. If he had to plead Lola, he would have. If he had to kiss her feet for forgiveness, he would have. If he had to say he was sorry 1,000 times over, he would have. But Lola wasn't interested in anything. She felt betrayed. He understood that. It was why he moved past her when she spoke again. If you're my friend, you will get out. The rain was ravenous. It bit into his back and sliced through his shirt. The cold had his fingers clenching within seconds, and his teeth clicking together. Jay didn't have to look behind him to know what a storm looked like. Lola's eyes said all. The waves crashed and tipped past her eyelids. Her mascara was clumped and formed constellations on her lashes. The more she bit her lip, the more the color faded away. He was scared that if he said anything at all, she would break. He didn't want to see Lola's bruised, broken heart. He wouldn't be able to fix it if he couldn't even fix his own. He'd failed her. Jay had failed himself. Is that a request? She shook her head. It's a plea. 25 vertical line umbrellas. Who knew a horror movie could be the way to heal heartbreak? Lola was in the basement, snuggled into her beanbag. The popcorn that she'd made for herself and at Trader Joe's was nestled in her lap. Even the chocolate generously drizzled on top wasn't enough to lift her spirits. She just felt tired and cold. When she tried to close her eyes and lulled herself to sleep, everything kept replaying in her head. Jay on his knees and crying, Courtney and Alex naked, Lola demanding that everyone get out. She felt sick to her stomach, but she didn't know how to get rid of the ugliness within her. Under her sweet facade really was a monster, and it planned on staying. It was her second skin. It was rooted in the hollow of her chest, and it wrapped its sickness around every nerve fiber lining her skin. The blackness was the tar that ran through her veins, making her heavy and putrid. Her breath came out in crystallized puffs. Hidden under a quilt, Lola still shivered. Her toes curled and her lips blued and ridges rose on her skin. The heater did nothing for her. With the snowstorm in her body following the thud of her heart, There was no getting away from the cold. The snowflakes dusted her veins and the breeze rustled her lungs. Icicles hung from her diaphragm and the roof of her mouth was slippery with frost. She would have called her body a winter wonderland if she'd been in the mood. "Lola," came a voice from the bottom of the stairs. She turned and watched warily as her father approached her. He was still dressed up from his date night, albeit a little wet from the rain. He also looked a little disheveled, messy hair, crooked tie, wrinkled shirt. She wondered what exactly her mother and father had been up to on their date night. "Hi Daddy," she replied softly. He took a seat next to her and stared intently at the projector screen. He'd arrived at a good time. Someone was about to die. Her father looked away, but Lola, in the mood that she was in, grinned. "Turn off the garbage," he told her, making a face and pausing the movie. "No," she replied indifferently. "It makes me feel better." Her dad sighed. He peeled one of Lola's hands out from underneath the blanket and he blinked. Once, twice, thrice. Her hand was pale and deathly cold. He brought it close to his lips, rubbing it fiercely as he blew on it. "Jay told me about everything that happened, you know. His name isn't allowed in this household anymore. He will be known as it who must not be named. You're not 5, Lola. Neither is he. He brought this on himself." Her hand refused to warm up. It was proof that she'd lost any and all warmth she used to possess. Alex had leached some of it when he broke up with her. Courtney took most of it when she went behind Lola's back and fell in love with the one Lola thought she'd have a forever with. Jay took the rest of it when he walked into her life like a hurricane, wreaking havoc wherever he went, on whatever he touched, and left her house like the calm after the storm, worn down, sad, and completely, utterly dead. People do dumb things when they're in love. I don't know whether or not what Jay did was right. I just know that it hurt you. And, although I understand exactly why you're upset with him, you need to look at things from his perspective too. Perhaps he thought he was being a good friend when he kept the one thing that would hurt you the most away from you. Perhaps he thought he was being a good person when he remained loyal to Courtney, the past lover, and Alex, the friend. The more you started to fall in love with Alex, the more Jay must have felt the need to stay loyal. The more he started to fall in love with you, the more he felt the need to protect his image. Don't you think that maybe he was scared of how you'd see him if you knew the truth? He'd be a bastard to me. I can't believe I was friends with this guy, much less thought about kissing him. He's a bad guy." Her dad shook his head. "Is he though? Jay could have told you their secret at the very beginning. He could have made you hate Alex and swept you off your feet like he wanted to, but he didn't. If he wanted to keep their trust, he had to sacrifice your friendship. If he wanted to keep you, he had to sacrifice them. The more he loved you, the more complicated things became for him. It doesn't matter at what angle you look at this, but there's no situation where Jay comes out on top. It's a lose-lose, always. Why would he want to stay friends with the two people who cheated him right behind his back? Why would he risk one of his good friendships to maintain a spoiled one? Can you call yours a good friendship, though? If you're asking him to give up on people he's known for years, much longer than he's known you, does that make you any better than Courtney or Alex?" Lola was quiet after that. The screams from the movie were drowned out by the gears turning in her mind. She thought of the way he'd asked her not to break his heart. She'd faced 2 heartbreaks in one day, but so had Jay. They were in this together, whether or not she liked it. She imagined he hated her just as much as she hated him. After all, she'd kicked him out of her house without giving him a second chance. All he did was omit, but it wasn't like Lola hadn't done that to him. Alex was right. Amongst the four of them, no one was innocent. They'd all been so busy burying their secrets that they'd forgotten to wash the dirt off their hands. Why hadn't Lola told Jay that her and Alex had kissed when he'd asked her about what happened after dinner? Because she was trying to protect her image, too. And letting Alex right back into her life without any explanation for why he walked out. Wasn't she just desperate? If she was feeling that way, there was no doubt in her mind that Jay would have felt the same way. Her father sighed next to her. "I'm not asking you to forgive either of them. Everyone in this family knows that Courtney has her own agenda, and it has no room for anyone but herself. Although, I would appreciate if you were merciful enough to let her come back home." Lola huffed. "But I'd ask that you give Jay a second chance. If there's anyone who deserves another try at your heart, it's that boy. I've seen the way he looks at you and the way he treats you, like you're his. He offered to take care of you when you and Courtney were hungover, Lola. He picked you up from the beach in the middle of the night without a second thought. He really does love you, and if it isn't love, his feelings are growing really, really fast." Lola scoffed. "He doesn't love me. Do you love him?" She shook her head. "Absolutely not. Not before, and especially not after this." Her dad's hands shot up in surrender. "I'm just saying. You have to really care for someone to be mad the way you are. I know you don't care for Alex anymore. You never did. Yet you still cry. You expected something like this from Courtney, yet you still cry. Who do you cry for if it isn't for either of them?" "Myself. You tell me." Her dad got up. "And Jay does love you. If he didn't, he wouldn't be sitting on our front porch right now, in the rain. Your mom and I invited him inside, but he declined, said he didn't want to go back on your wishes. He respects you, he treats you right, and he makes dumb mistakes for you. What else do you want from him? I told him to get out. I didn't tell him to stop using his common sense. You were his right here, Lola. Alex picked him up from his place in the morning, and you drove him here from the beach. His car is at home, and Courtney left with your car. He doesn't want a ride from me because he wants to talk to you." Lola's heart stopped. "Go to him," her dad tried, one last time. Lola went upstairs an hour later. It was 1:45. She had just about forgotten about Jay. Her tear ducts were finally empty and the trails were finally dry. She was heading to her room when she noticed the porch light was on. It was when she was turning it off that she saw a shivering body huddled into a ball as it tried to hide away from the rain. The umbrella wasn't doing much to cover him. Jay's head was hung low when she kneeled in front of him. Lola rested the hand on top of his shaking foot. "Come in," she mouthed. "Why you don't want me? You're probably already sick and your fingers are about to fall off. Come in. SC. Why you don't want me? I do. I do, and I always will. Please come in." 26 vertical line showers. Lola's foot jumped as she waited for Jay to get out of the shower, but he was in no rush. Their feelings for each other hung loosely in the air, saturated and suffocating. Lola sipped her mug of coffee and fiddled with Jay's freshly dried clothes. Steam seeped out from underneath the bathroom door and she wondered just how hot the water was. Jay was going to walk out with welts painted on his skin. Her thoughts drifted and she thought of kissing the redness away from his skin, of kissing his skin pink and purple and yellow and orange and everything bright. Knowing Jay, he would have let her. His hands would have roamed down the length of her back as her mouth dipped down, further and further. Blushing, she grabbed a book from her study table. Lola schemed through the pages, the words flying over her head, but she was thankful for the distraction. She didn't want to find out what else her mind would come up with as she continued thinking about Jay, and the shower, and what all could happen. Jay, on the other hand, felt no shame when he started imagining Lola in the shower with him. When his lungs constricted, they refused to expand again. Water ran down his back, his arms, and slid over his fingertips. His fingers were numb but taut, strong as they tested him with a slow, gentle drag. Jay clutched the handle of sliding glass door for some kind of balance, some kind of tether to sanity. When he experimented with another tug, he almost unraveled. His eyes were wide open, and the water and shampoo dripped into them. Through his rapid blinks, Jay could see her. She was standing in front of him, bare, and she waited for him to make the first move. Jay refused to close his eyes. He wanted to see her when he took her over the edge. There wasn't enough room in the shower for 2 pairs of feet. Jay imagined her back pressed to the wall, her legs tight around his waist and absolutely no space left between their bodies. His hand quickened its pace. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't patient. He felt a pulse. It accelerated by the second. It jumped when he imagined her moaning next to his ear. Jay saw stars every time she dug her fingers into his back, clinging to him for support. The sense of being in control, of being her sole weakness, made him feel powerful. It made him rough. But the harder he pressed her, the more she urged him for more. His lips couldn't consume enough. His fingers couldn't pleasure fast enough. He only had one thing left to give her. Jay was reaching his peak. He was breaking, and when the first signs of a crack showed up on his skin, he moaned. Lola decided, in that moment, to bang on the bathroom door. From the other side, she could hear his animalistic sounds, and she was disturbed, to say the least. The only thing she could think of was that he was dying. Maybe all that hot water had burned him alive. When Lola heard a sudden crash from the other side, she forced her way into the bathroom. The key and a mug in hand, her eyes widened as she made out a very naked, very injured Jay sprawled out on the shower floor through the glass door. "Are you okay?" she asked slowly. "Don't look." "I'm fine, but don't look." "That was a nasty fall, Ellison." The monotone in both their voices was unnerving. "Just hand me a towel, Lola." Pushing the sliding door back, Lola tossed him one of the beach towels. She turned the water off, and when she was pulling her hand out, she noticed his chest. It was very red, very wet, very appealing. Her eyes lingered for a second too long because Jay was then on his feet, towel around his torso, and a hand around her wrist. "What you lookin' at?" Lola thrust the mug of coffee in his direction. "I doubt you need this considering you used all the hot water, but drink." She even tipped the mug up to his lips. "After I give you an apology. It can't wait till tomorrow morning. If you didn't know this, your shower took almost an hour and it's late. I waited out in the cold, cold rain for you for 4 hours. You're insane." He yanked her close. "I'm also in love." His eyes were pinned on hers, searching for something, anything. He hoped for some kind of sign that even remotely indicated how she felt about him. But he was looking in all the wrong places. He was so busy looking into her eyes that he didn't notice the way she held her breath. He didn't notice the way her heart seemed to go on overdrive the more he tightened his hold around. Jay didn't notice the way she would press closer and then try to pull away. Lola was almost relieved that he didn't realize what he did to her. She was also disappointed. One part of her, the biggest part of her, wanted him to know everything. She wanted him to know that she thought of holding him, and kissing him, and touching him in places she would have never thought to touch. He had the same effect on her as she had on him, and it was slowly driving her insane. Lola glanced at his lips. "Are you going to kiss me? Would you let me?" "Maybe." Jay let go of her. "Not yet. I'll wait until after I apologize, and I know that you forgive me." She stepped closer to him, despite Jay distancing himself from her. She stood on her toes and her noses were touching when she said, "What if I said I didn't want you to wait till then?" Under the bathroom lights, his eyes burned with a dull fire. It flickered. It grew. It went out. His lips could brush hers. "Then I would tell you to get your priorities straight. You don't get to go from being mad at me to being okay with whatever happened. You don't get to tell me to get out of your house, and then try to seduce me hours later." He took his clothes from her and slipped out of the bathroom without another word. Lola was left standing there somewhat confused, royally stunned, and very sexually frustrated. 27 Vertical line scrambled eggs. Lola woke up in the morning to the smell of bacon and slightly burnt toast. She was sluggish as she brushed her teeth. She was sluggish as she pulled her hair back. She was so sluggish that she nearly tripped down the stairs, and she wasn't bothered to grab onto the railing for support. Lola was exhausted from the previous night's events. She hadn't gotten a lick of sleep. In fact, she'd been closer to pulling an all-nighter last night over any school night in her entire high school career. That's what love did to her. It drove her off the cliff of sanity, and right into the ravine of raging teenage hormones. She was sobbing the sleep out of her eyes when she paused at the kitchen entrance. She had to cover her mouth to keep from gasping aloud. Jay was wandering around her kitchen, a spatula in hand and an apron tied around his waist. His jeans were hanging low on his waist, exposing a thin line of his checkered boxes. That hardly fazed Lola. It was his bare, tan back that threw her off guard. He was walking around her house, partially naked, even though his shirt was probably lying on the floor in the guest bedroom. She stifled a wary smile. Given that she was the only one in the house, and she'd been sleeping, what was he trying to impress? The sizzling bacon in front of him. Lola could imagine Jay coaxing it to cook to a crisp. "Just a little longer, baby. Just a little more. I was expecting you to be gone by the time I woke up," Lola said sheepishly as she sat down at the dining table. From where she was, she could make out the shadow of everything Jay had piled onto plates: an assortment of fruits, 2 pancakes each, and scrambled eggs. He still wasn't done. "Good morning to you too, Spider Monkey," he said without turning, his voice laced with amusement. "Glad to see you woke up on the right side of the bed. Save me the sarcasm. This friendship isn't that far yet." He glanced at her briefly. "Yeah. Does asking me to kiss you come before or after we pass the sarcasm stage?" Lola was quiet when Jay set the plate in front of her. She took a mental note of how everything was shaped like a heart. He'd even managed to mold the bacon. He took a seat across from her and started digging in, but Lola, oddly enough, wasn't feeling very hungry. She just wanted her apology and explanation, and then she wanted him gone. If she had to, she would have given him the plate of food for the road, just as long as it meant he left faster. Yet, she took a cautious bite. Lola had learned, if Jay's cooking was as bad as his lemonade, she knew exactly where she was going to spit her food. But, when she shoveled in her first forkful of eggs, she was sinking into her seat as a moan danced in her throat. The scrambled eggs were fluffy and melted on the tip of her tongue. They were rich with salt and pepper and any other spice Jay had managed to find in the kitchen. Admittedly enough, from the looks of it, Jay was a better cook than her. Of course Lola wasn't going to tell him that. He was already falling over from his overinflated ego, and she wasn't going to stoke the flames anymore. She glanced up at him and noticed him pushing around his food. He looked uncomfortable. "Who taught you to cook like this?" she asked softly. Jay startled in his seat. "What?" Lola pointed to her plate. "This is really good. Where'd you learn to cook like this when you can't make lemonade for your life?" He shrugged. "My expertise lies in savory foods, not beverages." "You still didn't answer my question." "I learned on my own, Lola. My father was terrible, so I had to learn how to cook if we actually wanted to live. Frozen dinners were getting boring." "What about your mom?" Jay looked at her then. It was a haunted gaze, one filled with pain and sadness, but redemption too. "My mom left us my freshman year. She cheated on my father. They eventually got a divorce, and eventually it was only me and my old man." "Oh, oh." He stabbed at his fruits. "I knew about it, you know. I walked in on it and she begged me not to tell because she was afraid of what my dad would say, or think, or do. I kept her secret because I was scared of what would happen to me. If my parents fought, I was always caught in the middle. If my parents divorced, I would still be caught in the middle. I was scared about them not wanting me around, if they got divorced. And so my mom let the weight of her dumb secret weigh down on her 12-year-old son. Out of fear of what would become of me, I didn't say anything and they still ended up ending things with each other. I always wonder what would have happened if I just fucking said something." Lola shuddered. Jay had a reason. He had an explanation. He had an apology. And then the whole Courtney and Alex thing came up. It was like my parents all over again, and I didn't know what to do. I could have done something this time. I could have said something, but I got scared again. I got scared of what they'd think of me and what would become of our friendship if I said anything to anyone. I didn't know who I was supposed to trust, and it bit me in the ass. Again. With my parents, I didn't even get to say goodbye with my mom. With you guys, I just lost everyone. Alex exposed my secret. Courtney's with Alex, and you hate my guts." Jay. He held up a hand. "I don't want your sympathy. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I took our friendship for granted. I'm sorry I couldn't be the guy you wanted. I'm sorry I fell for you, knowing that things could end badly, and made all of this much harder than need be. My last intention was to hurt you." Jay. "I'm going to go." The screech of the chair against the tile floor made Lola cringe. Jay too, but he kept moving. "Jay." He paused. "Yeah. I didn't know." Then she said, "Jay." He turned to face her. "Yeah." He still couldn't look her in the eyes. "Do you want to stay for breakfast?" Do you mind if I take it to go? Of course not. 28 vertical line lifeguards. With the summer drawing to a close, the beach was slowly losing its crowd. A cool fall breeze had settled over the beach, and it was enough to chase off the people. In the meantime, lifeguards were still forced to sit through their shifts, and Lola was constantly pestered to serve the ghosts of the non-existent regulars. Everyone was getting ready to get back to work. The teenagers were the only ones who still relished the feeling of their feet sinking into the sand. After all, once school started back up, the beach would be a foreign concept. Lola was hit with a wave of nostalgia. She remembered all her sleepless nights during her senior year. Relaxation. Lola wasn't sure she remembered what that meant until she'd finally graduated. She had no one to talk to at the bar. Courtney was avoiding her, and Lola didn't mind. Her sister still had red on her ledger. The guys at the lifeguard tower regarded her cautiously, and she figured either Alex or Jay had filled them in on what had happened. For all she knew, she was one of two things to them: the savage who kicked everyone out of her house, or the overdramatic psychopath everyone knew her to be. Lola had reached the point where she couldn't care anymore. She was exhausted. She was constantly thinking about Jay, his smile, and charisma, and everything in between. She was always thinking about what her father had said about him. She was constantly thinking about the feelings she harbored for Jay, whether they were good or bad. Lola didn't have time to think about what others thought about her when she wasn't going to be seeing them by the end of the month. Chances were that half the guys weren't going to the same college as her, and no one had the sense of mind to think of her when all-night parties and sorority girls were bigger and better. It was exactly why Lola was taken aback when Alex approached her at the bar. She grasped the bottle of tequila on the shelf for a sense of security. "Lola," he said. "Screw him and his fake formalities. You're not allowed to talk to me. Leave. I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." She pointed the bottle at him. I don't care about anything you have to say. You're a liar. Everything you say is a lie wrapped in flowers and rainbows. I won't believe a word you say." "Come on," he groaned. She shook her head. "You're also a cheater. In fact, I bet you've cheated on me so many times, not even counting your sexual endeavors, that I wouldn't be able to count all of those instances on all 10 fingers and toes. So, I won't believe anything you do, either. You could literally be shot in front of me right now, and I would think you're cheating me into thinking you're hurt just so I'll sympathize and listen to what you have to say." His eyes widened. "That's not true." "It is true, though. You're a sleazeball, and you will leave now. I promise. I will drown you with tequila. But whatever I have to tell you is about Jay." Lola lost her train of thought. She closed her mouth, and momentarily considered smacking him with tequila when she saw his triumphant smile. "Go on." Alex inhaled. He exhaled. He looked flustered. Lola felt a sudden pang of worry. "He's leaving, Lola." Her heart stopped. "No, he's not." She tried to sound confident, but her voice wavered. She could see herself in Alex's eyes. She looked like a lost child. "He just quit lifeguarding today." "That means nothing. He literally called me 15 minutes ago and told me that he's leaving for the University of Minnesota on Saturday. He says he really doesn't have anything left here." She panicked. "Why didn't he tell me any of this?" "Maybe because he thinks you'd rather drop out of college than see his face or hear his voice ever again." "That's not true, and he knows it." If he did, then he wouldn't be leaving you behind without a word, would he? He actually didn't want me to tell you. Lola huffed. And why not? Because he didn't want to break your heart any more than he already had. 29 Vertical line families. Jay's father was more than surprised to see Lola Capstan at the doorstep. He almost didn't recognize her, considering the last time he'd seen her was the fateful dinner when Jay had ruined her doll. He associated anything related to Lola to a girl with long, blonde pigtails and to missing front teeth. He couldn't remember recognizing her at Jay's graduation either. Not when missing teeth suddenly equaled stunning smiles, and stoutness became slender elegance. George Ellison wished puberty had been that kind to him. "Lola," he said with a smile. "It's a pleasant surprise to see you here. It's so nice to meet you again." "Likewise, Mr. Ellison. How are you?" She flashed a smile, and George could understand exactly why Jay so mesmerized by her. Charm like hers was irresistible, but it was different from her sister's. While Courtney courted with lust running rampant, a calculated touch playing into her favor, Lola emanated only warmth. Her intentions were like those of a lover, but her behavior was like that of a friend. "I'm doing good," he told her as he invited her in. He led her into the living room, encouraging her to get comfortable as he did so himself. "What brings you here?" "I was actually wondering if Jay was here." "You just missed him. He left for the mall a couple of minutes ago. He said he'd be back in an hour, if you're willing to wait that long." Lola shook her head. "I'm actually on a lunch break right now. I have to get back to work." "Thank you for the offer, though." She was getting up, shouldering her purse, when George asked, "Would you like me to tell him anything for you?" She looked like she was going to reject the offer, but Lola stopped. The words were heavy on her tongue as she bit them back, and then swallowed them whole. She had hundreds of things she wanted Jay's father to tell him. She wanted him to yell at Jay on her behalf. Why did he have to be the second asshole to leave her? She wanted him to apologize to Jay for her. She hadn't meant to hurt him, to accuse him when she didn't know anything about him, contrary to what she thought. She wanted to talk to Jay for her, to tell him that she understood and that she forgave him and that she hoped he found it in his heart to forgive her. Most of all, Lola just wanted Jay's father to tell him that she'd come by. She wanted Jay to know that, on her side, things were going to be okay between them. Rock bottom was as far as they were going to go, and Lola was willing to get back up if he was willing to do so with her. She wanted him, and she was going to miss him. "I was actually hoping I could ask you a question." Her voice was hopeful. "Of course." George and Lola sat back down. Her palms were sweaty against her bare legs, and George didn't miss the way she kept wiping them against the rough material of her jeans. If he had learned something from his marriage, although it was some kind of a failure, it was how to read body language. Seeing how nervous Lola was, he wouldn't have minded betting a small sum on her feeling something for Jay. They were endgame. George was well aware of how much time Jay spent with her at the beach, and he was always talking about what they'd done together once he got home. And Lola was already far more sincere than Courtney could have ever been. Jay and Courtney were like Wes Gibbons and Annalise Keating. Any time spent alone together always came off as disturbingly inappropriate. George Ellison would sit in front of his TV, fingers crossed as he prayed that the two characters wouldn't kiss. Jay and Courtney were a terrible ship. Alex and Lola were like Michaela Pratt and Caleb Hapstall. They understood each other, oddly enough. But no matter how similar they were, superficial love only lasted so long. Just because the sex was great didn't mean the relationship was going to be as good. Jay and Lola were like Laurel Castillo and Frank Delfino, burning dislike that slowly developed into a comforting friendship that then became a passionate love. Their smiles and their dreams were only for each other. Their arguments were a ruination. Their tears were cracks chiseled into the seams of their hearts. They were the realest of all relationships because just as they were breakable, George knew that once they got back together, they'd be a little more unbreakable. Their secrets could only do them damage for so long. Do you know why he's leaving? Because he got his closure, Lola. I've seen Jay carefree, closed off, angry, happy, and now, relieved. He was a horribly carefree kid, didn't give a damn about anything, but he was a kid who grew up too fast. Seeing his mother do what she did scarred him. He had to make the decision that no boy his age should have been forced to make, and it damaged him a little. I saw him break one too many times, and I couldn't do anything to help him because I didn't know what he was going through. He was that loyal, and he still is. Once the secret came out, and his mother left, all I saw in him was anger. He hated everything. He put on a fake face for school, and thank God he didn't let his personal affect him academically, but he was volatile. He shouted, and punched walls, and broke his hand, and got into fights all the time. Then you came along. You were some kind of beacon because you helped him forget. He found comfort in you because God only knows what he found in those other friends of his, Alex especially. You treated him right, you helped him through a rough spot, and you showed him that it would be okay to love again. You taught him to trust again. Even after your guys' fight, Jay didn't resort back to being temperamental. Oddly enough, he was okay. I want to say that it's because he finally found someone to open up to about his mother, or his thinking process, or something, but I might be wrong. I just know that you helped him. Your presence was therapeutic for him, and it helped him realize that a sour parent and a bad relationship didn't mean it was the end of the world. Lola blinked. Do you think I could convince him to stay a little longer? George shook his head. I think Jay's realized that he's given all he can to this place. He's exhausted himself in being the best that he could for this town, and he's ready to move on to someplace where he can rinse and repeat his cycle. This time, for the better though. Do I like it? Not at all. I'm going to miss the boy. Am I supportive of him? Every step of the way. They were at the front door then, George and Lola. Her feet were halfway in her sneakers and she was unlocking her car when George said, "His flight is at noon tomorrow. In case you want to say goodbye, we'll be there at 10:30. You think he'd want me there? If he did, he would have given me the time himself, right?" George smiled. "He wants you there, Lola. Trust me. He has a weird way of showing his affection for people, but I think he'd be relieved to see you at the airport. You've helped him mature so much, even if you don't think so. By just being his friend, and then turning into something more for him, you did in 3 months what I couldn't do in several years. Funny what something as simple as love can do, right?" "Absolutely." "And," he started, leaning close as if to tell her a secret, "even if Jay didn't want me to tell you when he was leaving, I still would've. After all, I ship you two more than I ship Connor Walsh and Oliver Hampton." 30 vertical line love. Checking in bags was a nightmare. Jay's father was lugging half of his clothes back home because Jay's suitcases were too damn heavy. It wasn't his fault he was going to be a broke college student who wouldn't be able to afford the winter coat to battle the Minnesota snow. Jay didn't even know what snow looked like. The closest he came to winter was 40-degree weather. He wasn't sure how he was going to fare in the cold. Knowing him, he'd find a way to drown in the snow. He heard rumors about Minnesota snow being the absolute worst, after New York. A short conversation with his father later, Jay was standing in line to go through security. Of course, they were going to take out his 3 water bottles and the crackers stuffed into the very bottom of his backpack. They were going to take away his flavored water and make him survive off overpriced, plain airport water and stale granola bars. Jay was only going to be able to afford, and was only willing to afford, the hundreds of boxes of ramen waiting for him. He wasn't about to waste $3 on a bottle of Dasani. Jay was still returning his father's casual waves halfway through the security line, to the dismay of everyone standing behind him and next to him. But something was wrong. Soon enough, his dad's waves were frantic, violent even. Jay wasn't sure if his father was getting excited, or if he was having a seizure. Jay was hopping in his spot, and down the line, as he tried to look over people's heads. He was pretty sure he accidentally smacked a kid on the back as he waved wildly. He was getting on people's nerves to the point where someone actually tried to trip him. Jay shot them a look, "Nice try, Dick Zack," before he returned his attention to his dad, who was lost in the crowd. He saw a familiar head of blonde hair, though. People cheered as Jay fled from the line, even if he shoved them into each other. The closer he got to the end of the line, the larger his smile became, because standing next to his father was an exhausted Lola. She was keeled over, hands braced on her knees as she tried to catch her breath. She'd been running, Jay could tell by the phlegm she coughed into a trash can nearby, yet she offered him a weak smile. Her hair was matted to her face, beads of sweat running down her forehead, but Lola was doing her best to make it seem like she was unfazed. "You gonna make it?" Jay teased as she finally gained control over what she coughed up. He rubbed her back as she held onto the trash can, just as a precaution. His father was nowhere to be seen. "Probably not, but dying can wait till later. Did you run here for me? It's a miracle that my 2 left feet even carried me this far, honestly. Not only did I run up 5 flights of stairs, because I could only find a damn parking spot in level D, and 4 sets of stairs doesn't even lead up to the main freaking level, but I also nearly got hit by a car 3 times. I scraped my knee, I ran into a wall, and I knocked someone's bags right off of the carrier, and I didn't even offer to help put them back on. I just went through the fucking Olympics to tell you goodbye, Ellison, so you better feel pretty damn special." He couldn't wipe the smile off his face. That's how special he felt. "I feel like the luckiest guy alive right now. Because you are. And I'm feeling like my efforts weren't worth it because you were going to go through security without even texting me goodbye, weren't you?" Jay fished his phone out of his pocket and showed Lola the screen. He had her number pulled up, and ready to put on speed dial. Jay was almost insulted that she would think that he'd leave without saying at least something to her. After all, he owed her, not only for not telling her about Alex and Courtney, but also because if it hadn't been for her push, he still would have been hanging onto his mother's secret. "I was going to call you, Lola. If not before security, then after security. I was going to call you and talk to you until a flight attendant tried to make me hang up. Even then, They were going to have to confiscate the phone from me to make me hang up on you. That's how ready I was to talk. Just like you went through the Olympics for me, I was ready to get kicked off my flight for you." "That's dumb," she murmured, but she was grinning right back at him. "So is getting hit by a car, but that didn't seem to stop you." His hand snuck up her arm, sliding over the slope of her neck until it was cupping her cheek. Lola unintentionally leaned into it, and then into him. Jay was relieved to have her back in his arms, no walls up between them. Even if his secrets and his nearness had her emotions going wild, Lola said nothing, and perhaps that was better. Perhaps leaving everything unsaid was going to be their road to redemption. Jay could tell that everything wasn't behind them. Going forward, he had a feeling Lola was going to be blackmailing him a lot for keeping Courtney and Alex a secret, but, to his surprise, the thought made him happy. If him and Lola could fix their friendship to the point where she was joking about the very thing that broke it in the first place, Jay would be happy. He would take a messed up friendship over a non-existent one any day. And, if it ever became more than a friendship, Jay wasn't going to complain. He shipped himself and Lola, after all. "I know what you're thinking, Jay," she said softly. Her lips moving against the thin material of his shirt made him tremble. "What am I thinking?" he challenged. Lola pulled away, dragging a finger down the center of his chest, then resting her palm flat over his heart. For once, it was a steady beat. Jay didn't have to be nervous around her anymore. She knew exactly what he felt. It didn't stop him from biting his lip, though, or making him look away. Even if Lola knew just how much he liked her, he didn't need her seeing the crazy in his eyes. Either she would have found the affection endearing, or creepy. "You're thinking of you and me and a relationship. You know, falling in love, and kissing, and everything that comes after that. I'm not. Are to see. You just licked your lips after looking at mine. Stop seducing me, Capstan. Then I'm going to apologize instead." Jay made a face. "For what? For hurting you? Albeit, you hurt me too, but that didn't give me an excuse to treat you the way I did. Especially considering how good your intentions were. I'm sorry that I questioned you, and pushed you away. I'm sorry about what happened to you, too. When I started to love you, I was scared because I thought I loved Alex, but no one has ever treated me as good as you do. No one has ever looked at me the way you do, or talked to me the way you do. I don't think anyone has ever loved me as much as you let on, and I went and ruined that. I feel like I made you hate me, and for that, I'm sorry. And I just ask that you forgive me. If you can't bring yourself to love me again, I just hope you don't hate me because I don't think I can't find it in me to hate you. I'm pretty sure I've fallen too hard to put myself back together, Jay." Their breaths mingled. Their noses brushed. Lola's eyes fluttered shut as Jay yanked her closer to him, squeezing out any air between them. His fingers roved down the length of her back, splaying over her ribcage and drawing out a deep breath. Lola fisted tangles of his hair. "How could you even think that I'd hate you? I was pretty devilish that last week. Thank you for finally admitting you're the devil." She pulled at his hair roughly, and he gasped. "But I find that a hairish Lola is actually the hottest Lola. You're just saying that so I don't kill you." He smiled. His lower lip was barely brushing her upper lip. "That's true. What's also true is that I say that because I am madly in love with you, and every aspect of you, even the psychotic parts, turn me on. I'm just the sexually deprived boy who needs his girl because he's fucking missed her and he wants her back." Lola was seconds away from kissing him. "You never lost me." People were starting to stare because Lola was quivering against him. Jay wasn't even doing anything to her, but he had complete control over her. "Let's be best friends?" she asked. "The bestest of friends," he replied. "Do best friends kiss?" He chuckled, swiftly pulling her tighter against him. No air between their chests, a breath of air between their lips. "I've always wondered what it would be like to kiss my best friend." "Platonically, though," she laughed, finally bringing his lips down to hers. Stage 3 vertical line complete. End. Happily ever afters did exist. Even if they weren't running off into the sunset, hand in hand, or riding down the streets in a carriage, they were real. The perfect ending was infusion of shy smiles, entwined fingers, and stolen kisses. It was breathy whispers over the phone, weighted promises, and shameless teases. Lola's happily ever after started the minute Jay hoisted her up into his arms as he kissed her for the first time. It was the feeling of warmth, sincerity, security that made her so willing to reach for her Disney-esque ending. Her happily ever after was still going strong almost 4.5 years later. It wasn't like Jay wasn't smothering her with affection every day. It was talking to him over the phone that made getting to classes bearable. It was his constant motivation that convinced her to study. His constant calls reminded her of the summer, just how much time they'd spent together. It was like he was next to her, day and night. When she was in bed, it was like his arms were wrapped around her torso, pulling her closer to him as he drifted off into a dreamless sleep. Lola always fell asleep to the sound of Jay's voice, and Jay always fell asleep to the sound of Lola's even breathing. It was a lonely Christmas Eve. Sharing an apartment with Courtney wasn't one of Lola's best decisions. It really wasn't her decision to begin with. It was a responsibility thrust upon her by her parents. It was their way of getting the sisters to forgive each other. To their dismay though, Lola and Courtney just seemed to fight more often. It seemed like Courtney spent more time at Alex's dorm than she did in the apartment. One thing Lola had forgotten to take into account when she moved in was just how much Courtney would hog her car. The more time Courtney spent with Alex, the more Lola started to realize she wasn't going to be going home early for Christmas. That's why she was sitting in the living room, textbooks sprawled in her lap. Being outside wasn't much better. The damp California air reminded her that she wasn't going to be getting any snow anytime soon. Without her parents singing Christmas carols around the house at the crack of dawn, Lola had started to forget what Christmas was supposed to be like. The peppermint mocha wasn't doing much to lift her mood. Cranking the temperature all the way down didn't put her in the Christmas spirit, it just gave her a cold. Mittens and knitted hat on, Lola was in the middle of blowing her nose with her 12th tissue when there was a knock at her front door. She crossed her fingers in the hopes that it would be Courtney. If it was her shameless sister, Lola had a good idea of how she was going to get revenge for being stranded in their apartment. If it was a mass murderer, Lola hoped the cold would kill her before they did. Drink in hand, Lola peeked through the peephole. All she could make out was a very pudgy man, clad in all red and white, black boots and unmatched accessories. Lola squealed as she threw the door open. She hadn't seen Santa Claus since she'd last taken a picture with him back in 4th grade. It was too bad she couldn't recreate the memory. Pigtails and plain dresses were just too outdated. But Lola's elation was short-lived. The peephole was misleading. When she came face to face with a very tall, very skinny Santa, she frowned. The suit was too big, the hat was falling over his face and the beard was just out of place. Who was this imposter? "You're not Santa," Lola whined. Fake Santa hoisted his sack of toys over his shoulder and stalked forward. "I'm much, much better than Santa." Lola could have picked the voice out from anywhere. "Jay." She didn't care that his hands were full, but neither he. He held her effortlessly when she leapt into his arms, legs around his torso and arms around his neck. Her face pressed closer to his cheek as he laughed, kicking the door shut as he walked the two of them back into her living room. Lola refused to let go until he was seated comfortably on the couch, her legs pressed against his hips. He captured her lips with his, drawing her into him with the fleeting flick of his tongue and the mold of his smile. Lola's fingers dug into his shoulders as the hands resting on her hips started to fall further down, one cupping her thigh and the other hooking onto the waistband of her pajamas. It was too late for her to feel embarrassed about her stained penguin sweats. She pulled away suddenly. "We can't," she said, urging Jay's fingers away from the drawstring. He didn't stop, though. While Lola tipped her head to the side every time his lips pressed against hers, Jay had her rooted in place. She couldn't stop him from sponging kisses down her neck or across her collarbone or over the swell of her breasts. A hand threaded into his hair, Lola gasped as kissed the skin over her heart. "I get to see you only once during the school year, and you're telling me I can't ravish you? I'm sick, stupid. I have a cold. We can be sick together. Then I'll have an excuse to shamelessly cuddle with you." Lola laughed. "That's disgusting. I'm comfortable with you, Jay, but even I wouldn't be willing to get a cold from you." Untangling her fingers, Lola pressed the hand against his chest to keep him at bay as she pulled his burlap sack towards her. It was awfully heavy. "What the hell do you have in here?" "Christmas presents." He smirked. "Any for me? You get the one with the Rudolph gift wrap." Lola shook the box, holding it close to her ear. It wasn't jewelry of any sort. She examined the size. It was too small to be a textbook. Jay leaned into her as she tore off the wrapping, grinning as he watched her eyebrows furrow. The box was all too fancy. Bright pink with black ribbon didn't mean good news in Lola's mind. Or maybe it was Jay's devilish smile that made her start doubting her present in the first place. Her mouth fell open as she pulled the lid off, running her fingers along the silky, flimsy material. "What the hell is this?" she cried. "It's a slip thing, whatever some of you girls wear to bed. And look, I bought matching panties." She threw the clothes at him. "I'm not wearing it," she snapped, getting to her feet. "Come on. Not even the striptease? Return it, Jay. How about a quick fashion show?" "Stop it, Jay. Let me just see how you look in it." "Jay." He threw his hands up in the air just as she turned around. "Kidding, kidding," he laughed. He started to trail behind Lola as she weaved through the apartment, kitchen, then laundry, then bedroom. She pushed him away every time he tried to hug her, but he could tell she was smiling. Jay knew that smile. She was considering the fashion show. It was why she didn't protest when he pushed her hair aside and pressed his lips to the hollow of her neck as she started to make her bed. His hands, once again, began their travel across her body, this time one sneaking around her waist while the other trailed along the hem of her sleep shirt. Lola's eyes fluttered shut and she started to lose grip of the bed sheet. "So, you know how we're boyfriend-girlfriend, right? Best friends," she moaned. "Best friends with benefits," he negotiated. She elbowed him in the stomach but urged him to continue. "Well, I've been thinking a lot lately about how much I love being friends with you. All our inside jokes and random laughs and late-night conversations never seem to get old. I've gotten so used to having you around, or at least a form of you, that I can't seem to remember what the days were like before I had you by my side. I can't remember much of the past, but I know that from this point on until the beginning of forever, I want my girlfriend, my accomplice, and my best friend at my side at all times. I want her smiles, her giggles, and her secrets all to myself. I want to be with her through her UPS, and all the way through her downs. I want her to know that, with me, there will never be a dull moment in her life. There will never be a moment where I don't support what she wants, needs, or deserves." Lola clung to his forearm. Jay continued. "I guess what I'm trying to say is that I want my best friend to stay my best friend while still becoming something more than that. I want her to agree to be my everything and make me the happiest, the luckiest man alive." She was breathing hard. She wouldn't turn. Her chest was rising rapidly. He laid her down on her now-made bed. "I knew I wanted to marry you from the moment you pantsed me in 8th grade. I'm praying you feel the same way." She laughed. "I knew I was going to marry you from the moment you approached me at that stupid beach bar," she whispered, kissing him. "You're still sick," he murmured against her lips. She twisted so she was on top. "Will you make me the luckiest girl alive and get sick so we can shamelessly cuddle?" "Yes." The answer would always be yes. The end.